beginning of disc number 4 of the deposition of Dr. Stэнli Plotkin. We are on the record. The time is 14:33.
Dr. Plotkin, you earlier said that it would be ethical, you believe, to conduct a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study of the childhood immunization schedule using adults. Is that correct?
Oh, well, I mean, you can't. I suppose you could test the childhood schedule in adults, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense if that's what you mean. You could test individual vaccines, I suppose, although the adults, in all likelihood, will have been either previously vaccinated or previously infected. So it wouldn't be a very easy study to do. But I suppose it's conceivable.
And you think, but it is something that could be done to assess certainly adults are not children, but it would at least give a sense of the safety profile of people who've, on the one hand, gotten the childhood schedule versus those who haven't. And I would think it's something that you would, that you would welcome, given that it should hopefully, I presume, show that both groups will have similar rates of of total health outcomes.
Well, it's difficult to imagine how one would do it. Now, for example, for Haemophilus influenza, disease is rare in adults, of the type B anyway. And so I'm not sure what one would learn by doing such a study. For hepatitis B,
the adverse
of course,
events, not the efficacy, Dr. Plotkin.
Yeah, well, I suppose, but whether it would be translatable from adults to children is uncertain in itself. So I don't think it's a very practical way of studying the safety of vaccines. Fortunately for hepatitis B, it's indicated for adults as well as children, so that's something that can be done. And papillomavirus vaccine, of course, can be given to adults. So we have data from that type of study. But in terms of systematic studies of childhood vaccines in adults, I don't think that's a very feasible or useful.
If the group that received, the adults that received the full schedule versus those that didn't, had significantly higher rates of autoimmune or neurological or other adverse events, you don't think that could provide useful information for potentially addressing potential safety concerns and making the schedule safer?
So for that, you need a group of adults who have never received vaccines. And
why is that?
Well, what are you comparing? If you're comparing those who were vaccinated as children with those who weren't, so you need a group that was not vaccinated.
Well, most adults today have not received anywhere near the number of vaccines that children are being exposed to today. So, for example, Dr. Plotkin, when you were a child, as an example, what vaccines did you receive?
Diphtheria, in childhood, I think it was probably only diphtheria.
Okay.
In those days.
So if such a study were constructed, would you be willing to participate?
You mean as someone who did not receive?
Would you be willing to be part of the study in which you would either, you would be randomized, so you'd either get the saline injections or the full childhood vaccine schedule? Would you be willing to do that?
But then you'd have
I'm
to
sorry,
have...
I didn't hear the answer. Would you be willing to do that?
Yes, but then you'd have to have a group of 80-year-olds who have received all of the childhood vaccines that are now given, which would be pretty difficult to do. So I think this kind of study you're talking about is either difficult or useless because you don't have the right groups to compare. You could do it perhaps in 20-year-olds, if you could find 20-year-olds who haven't been vaccinated.
Well, if it was, if they did age controls and so they had a range of ages, including 80s and 20-year-olds, would you be willing to participate?
Oh, I'd be willing to participate in any reasonable study,
Great.
but I don't think it would be very useful.
Okay. In 1994, the IOM issued another report regarding vaccine safety. Are you familiar with that report?
94,
Yeah.
the last one was in 2000, as I recall.
2011 was the last one.
Well, okay, there was a large one in about 2000 as well. Anyway, so
In 1994, let me give you. Sounds like you don't remember. Let's just give this to you. Handing you, Dr. Plotkin, what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 20. The title of this report is Adverse Events Associated with Childhood Vaccines, correct?
yes.
This is also by the Institute of Medicine. This is also, in this report, the IOM looked at 54 serious injuries associated with a number of different vaccines, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you provide information to the IOM committee conducting this review?
I don't recall doing that.
Okay. Do you see on, and there are the acknowledgements on the second page? Your name is in the middle there, Stэнli Plotkin, Pastor Morak. I can't pronounce.
Merrieux.
Yeah. I don't speak French, I apologize. And can you pronounce that?
Merrieux.
That's MEREUX CONNAUGHT company. Okay. Now, if you go to, out of these 54 condition pairs, the IOM found sufficient evidence to support a causal relationship for 14 of them and rejected a causal relationship for 4 of them. Do you see that?
Where are you referring?
So if you go, Dr. Plotkin, to the fifth to last page, it has the causality table.
Mm-hmm.
You see category 3 is the evidence favors rejection of a causal relationship.
Yes.
Okay, and you see they rejected it for 4 of the associated adverse events, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You seeing, is that a yes?
Yes.
You see in category 4, it says the evidence favors acceptance of a causal relation.
Yes.
Okay, do you see that there's 2, 3, there are 5 conditions listed there, including Guillain-Barré, bronchial neuritis, anaphylaxis. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And on the next page for category 5, which is the evidence establishes a causal relation, do you see that it lists 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 conditions, correct?
Yes.
Okay. However, for the remaining conditions, so they looked at 54. If we subtract out the 3 categories we just looked at, 38 of those conditions, the 38 remaining conditions, the IOM couldn't make a causality determination because the science hadn't been conducted yet, right?
Yes.
Okay. The IOM stated at the end of this report, quote, the lack of adequate data regarding many of the adverse events under study was of major concern to the committee. Presentations at public meetings indicated that many parents and physicians share this concern. Do you see the last page of the report that you're holding, of the excerpt? Do you see that it says that in the first two lines under need for research and surveillance?
Yes.
Dr. Plotkin, in 2011, the IOM then issued another report on vaccine safety, and this time it looked at 158 of the most commonly claimed serious injuries after vaccination, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. The title of that report is Adverse Effects of Vaccines, Evidence of Causality.
Yes.
You're familiar with that report?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know who commissioned and paid for that report, by the way?
Which commission?
Who commissioned and paid for that report?
No.
Okay. Would it be surprising to you if I told you that HRSA, the agency within the HHS that defends against vaccine injury claims, that commissioned that report?
Wouldn't surprise me.
Okay. Did you provide information to the IOM committee conducting this review?
I don't recall specifically whether I did or not. A lot of people ask for my opinions, and when asked, I give my opinions.
Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 21. Is this the 2011 IOM report we were just talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see there's little Roman numeral 7? Page little Roman numeral 7. See a section entitled Reviewers?
Oh, yes. I'm on the list.
Okay. Do you see, I'm going to read the first two sentences and you can tell me if that's what this report says. It says, this report has been reviewed in draft form by individuals chosen for their diverse perspective and technical expertise in accordance with procedures approved by the National Research Council's Report Review Committee. The purpose of this independent review is to provide candid and critical comments that will assist the institutions in making its published report as sound as possible and to ensure that the report meets institutional standards for objectivity, evidence, and responsiveness to the study charge. Is that what it says?
Yes.
And you're one of the people they gave the report to review?
Yes.
And next to your name, it says University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
It doesn't disclose that at that time you were working for all four of the major vaccine makers, correct?
What do you mean by working for them? I mean, at that point, I was no longer at Pasteur Media Connaught.
Did you, in 2011, were you receiving compensation and remuneration from Sanofi?
I was, yes, as I've said before, I was consulting for Sanofi as well as others.
Were you consulting for Merck?
Yes, probably at that time, yes.
And GSK?
Yes.
Okay. And as well as a whole host of other for-profit companies seeking to develop vaccines, correct?
Yes.
But I'm just saying that's not mentioned here, correct?
No.
Okay. So, do you know how many other individuals who were involved in reviewing or compiling this report were receiving money from pharmaceutical companies making vaccines that's not disclosed in this report?
I have no knowledge of that.
You provided handwritten comments to the IOM for this report?
If I reviewed the report, which apparently I did, I am sure I made comments. I don't know if they were handwritten, probably not, since my handwriting is illegible.
All right. In this report, the IOM found that 14 of the 158 serious injuries most commonly reported after certain vaccines were that the evidence supported a causal relationship, correct?
Is that, where is that stated?
Well, if you go to page 3 of the report, it's numeral 3. Well, let me ask you the question a different way, Dr. Plotkin. If you look at that chart, you can see that there's little symbols. Do you see those, Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. So an I represents inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship, correct?
Yes.
And an FR means favors rejection of a causal relationship, correct?
Yes, apparently, yes.
If you look through this,
No, FA favors acceptance.
I said FR, I'm sorry. FR
Yeah,
favors
yeah,
rejection.
Right.
FA favors acceptance. And CS convincingly supports a causal relationship,
Yes.
right? So I think what you'll note when you look through this chart is that most of the conditions have an I, correct?
Yes.
Any reason the report indicates that for 135 out of the 158 reviewed, it found that it could not locate sufficient evidence to make a causality determination, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the IOM concluded that of the 135 most commonly claimed injuries from vaccination, it didn't know whether or not the vaccines caused that. Let me ask you something. You know, you earlier stated that hepatitis B doesn't cause encephalitis, right?
That's my opinion, yes.
But the IOM, after doing its review, determined it couldn't find science to support a causal determination one way or another. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But that means that they don't have evidence for the supposition.
That it
Right.
either causes or doesn't cause.
Right.
They don't know.
They don't know because there aren't enough data.
Right. But
In the absence of data, my conclusion is that there's no proof that causation exists.
so if there's no data to show that it causes or it doesn't cause,
Yes.
your supposition is that I understand correctly?
Yes.
Is that it doesn't cause it.
That there's no proof that it does.
Okay, that's different than saying it doesn't cause it, correct?
Correct.
So when you were saying earlier when I asked you at the beginning of this whether certain vaccines cause certain conditions and you said no they don't, did you just mean that no there's not enough evidence to make a decision one way or another?
I mean that there's no knowledge known to me that they do certain things that some may have alleged happen after vaccination.
Like, for example, the IOM reviewed whether hepatitis B can cause lupus because of lots of reports, or influenza can cause lupus. They concluded that there's insufficient evidence one way or another to make a determination. You indicated,
Right.
but you indicated earlier that those vaccines don't cause lupus. Your testimony, you're saying that you said no because you weren't aware of a mechanism by which it could cause it. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. But the science really isn't available to make a determination on causation yet, right?
The science doesn't show that there is a relationship. And it is, unfortunately, to prove a negative requires a lot more data than to prove a positive.
If there was a, if there was a study that had a placebo and a control group, then we could know whether or not these conditions are caused by these vaccines, correct?
Yes, it would have to be an enormous study, and it would have to be randomized, ideally, which is unlikely to be the case since...
It needs to be the enormous because you're assuming these conditions are rare, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And this study that you're saying needs to be done before vaccines are licensed, they do clinical trials, we've seen, right?
Yes.
And they have thousands of people typically in them, correct?
Yes, and
Okay.
therefore they can study common conditions. But uncommon conditions are very difficult to study because they are uncommon. And therefore one would need a very, very large study, and one would have to have randomization, which is, of course, inherently difficult.
If you actually had a placebo-controlled study, an inert placebo-controlled study of 8,000 people, you could at least determine that in a population of that size, whether or not there is a detectable adverse event rate for any of these conditions, correct?
For some of those conditions, yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to show you. I'd like to show you an excerpt from that report. Okay. Before I do that, actually, a few quick little questions. Tdap is one of the vaccines on the childhood schedule, right?
Yes.
It's administered to babies during the first year of life.
Yes.
We already talked about this at 2, 4, and 6 months, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did I say Tdap or DTaP?
Oh, DTaP is the one that's used.
I meant DTaP in that question.
I have Tdap.
Okay. Same answer if it was DTaP, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's correct that, please. Now, as for Tdap, TDAP, little d, little a, little p, with a capital T, that's given to pregnant women, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And DTaP and Tdap refer to vaccines which contain diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, and acellular pertussis, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What was the IOM's conclusion in 2011 about whether these vaccines can cause autism?
I'd have to look that up, but I feel confident that they do not cause autism.
You feel confident that that's what the IOM concluded?
I don't remember what the IOM concluded, but I don't believe there's any evidence that that's the case.
Is there any evidence that that's not the case? Why don't I show you this, Dr. Plotkin? I'm going to hand you what's being marked as Exhibit 22. Oh, Dr. Plotkin, may I actually have that back for a moment? I'm sorry. Nope, I gave you the right one. There you go. Thank you. Okay. This is an excerpt from the IOM's report, right?
Yes.
Okay. And this is where the IOM discusses the evidence with regard to whether DTaP or Tdap cause autism, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If you turn to the second page, can you read the causality conclusion with regard to whether DTaP and Tdap cause autism?
The committee did not identify literature reporting clinical, diagnostic, or experimental evidence of autism after the administration of vaccines containing diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, and acellular pertussis antigens.
Okay. Dr. Plotkin, I'm sorry. Can you please read, Dr. Plotkin, can you please read the causality conclusion with regard
have-
to
the
that the
evidence
IOM reached with one
is-
second, Dr. Plotkin,
yeah.
I'm sorry. The court reporter has got to be able to take down the full question or there won't be a clear record. Can you please read the causality conclusion in the IOM report with regard to whether DTaP and TDAP can cause autism?
The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis containing vaccine and autism.
So the IOM reviewed the available evidence with regard to whether TDAP or DTaP can cause autism, and their conclusion was the evidence doesn't exist to show whether DTaP or TDAP do or do not cause autism, correct?
Yes, but the point is that there are no studies showing that it does cause autism, except one study by two well-known anti-vaccination figures, Geyer and Geyer, who have no legitimacy whatsoever. So what they're saying is that there's no evidence, and the important point from my point of view is that there is no positive evidence to do a proper study, as we've been discussing, which would disprove it, would involve the controlled administration of vaccines and withholding vaccines from children who should have them.
Dr. Plotkin, was the IOM able to identify a single study that supported your claim? Strike that. If you take a look at that section, please, was the IOM able to identify a single study supporting that DTaP or TDAP do not cause autism?
No, they did not identify a study.
Okay.
But the point is, and I have to repeat myself, that absence of evidence does not allow you to conclude that the two phenomena are related.
You're making assumptions, Dr. Plotkin, about, I think, what's built. I understand that. I mean, I only interrupt because, it's 3 o'clock and I don't mind letting you, give a lot of discussion about things that aren't relevant, but to the question.
I think it's relevant in the reports issued by the IOM.
Yes.
That their conclusion about evidence not being available does not allow you to conclude that the phenomena, that there is a causal relationship.
I'm not sure. No, I never said that, and I'm not sure anybody in this room said that, Dr. Plotkin.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
But it does allow you to conclude that the evidence doesn't exist to say that DTaP and TDAP do not cause autism, correct?
There is not evidence to say a million different things.
Okay.
You have to prove.
Did the IOM report look at whether the MMR vaccine can cause autism?
I'd have to look and see.
Yes.
I believe that
it
they did.
And what did it find? Found? I'm sorry. They said it did. And
I'm looking to see.
it said it favors rejection because it did find studies.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
That's right. So studies are possible to determine whether or not a vaccine does or does not cause autism, correct?
They are possible, yes.
Okay. But the study to determine whether DTaP or TDAP does not cause autism has not been done, right?
A study that would definitively show that it doesn't has not been done, but there's no evidence that it does.
Okay. But since, Dr. Plotkin, we don't know whether DTaP or TDAP cause autism, right? It would be a bit premature to make the unequivocal sweeping statement that vaccines do not cause autism, correct?
In the absence of evidence, one should not draw any conclusions except that there is no evidence. And so I don't infer from the absence of evidence about a million different things that they're necessarily true. One has to do studies to determine whether or not a phenomenon exists. And usually those studies are done because there is some suspicion that of a relationship. But we have no suspicions, at least I don't, that autism is caused by DTAP.
Well, you may not have that suspicion, but it is one of the most commonly reported conditions, adverse events, which is why it was reviewed in this IOM report from DTaP, TDAP, which we discussed earlier. So I'm not asking you to say that vaccines do cause autism. I'm not asking that at all. I'm asking you as a scientist, can you make the statement that vaccines do not cause autism if you don't know whether DTaP or TDAP cause autism?
As a scientist, I would say that I do not have evidence one way or the other.
Right.
As a practicing physician, I have to weigh all kinds of things in making a decision about a patient, whether to do something or not to do something. And I make those decisions based on the body of knowledge, even in the absence of definitive information for every case. This has been true for medicine ever since its inception.
I'm asking you a simple question. I'm asking you, since the science has not yet been done regarding whether DTaP or TDAP cause autism, isn't it true that you cannot make the sweeping statement that vaccines do not cause autism?
I could make the statement that there is no evidence that vaccines cause autism.
Okay.
And therefore,
I'm not asking you that
and
question.
therefore,
Dr. Plotkin,
and therefore,
yeah.
vaccines, and therefore,
he's not answering the question.
And therefore, vaccines should be given to protect against serious diseases.
Will, Dr. Plotkin, if we've already reviewed the IOM report, the IOM could not find evidence that DTaP or TDAP cause autism. I'm asking you, knowing that, isn't it just a bit premature to make the unequivocal sweeping statement that vaccines do not cause autism?
I would say it is logically true that you cannot you cannot point to proof that it doesn't cause autism. But as physicians and public health specialists, one has to make decisions in the absence of thousands of pieces of information that one would like to have. And one of them is that vaccines protect against serious infectious diseases, and there's no evidence that they cause autism. So therefore, I recommend vaccinations to this child and every other child who does not have a contraindication.
But since there's no evidence that DTaP or TDAP don't cause autism, you can't yet say that vaccines do not cause autism, correct?
I cannot say that as a scientist or a logician, but I can say as a physician that no, they do not cause autism. Because as a physician, I have to take the whole body of scientific information into consideration when I make a recommendation for a child.
Their IOM reviewed the science. They didn't find a single study that supported whether or not vaccines...
Forgive me. Counsel, your connection's not that great. It's very choppy, and I cannot hear anything you're saying, but I do hear your voice. Please repeat.
All right. At this point, Dr. Plotkin, just wait for him to move on to the next question.
I'm not asking the same question, Counselor. Your objection is noted. I'm responding to his comments, which are different every time. So, okay, so what you're saying is, as a physician or logician, then you couldn't say vaccines do not, you could not say vaccines do not cause autism. But as a pediatrician, you're saying that you would say that to a parent because you want to make sure they get the vaccine. Is that right?
You know, I can't be sure that DTaP doesn't cause leprosy. That doesn't mean that that stops me from using a DTaP vaccine.
Are people claiming that DTaP has caused leprosy? Are you aware of any such complaints?
I'm not aware of any such complaints, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it on the web one of these days.
Okay, but people have made enough complaints about DTaP, Tdap causing autism that the Institute of Medicine at the commission of HHS thought it was serious enough to do a scientific review, correct?
Yes.
Okay. They didn't review whether DTaP causes leprosy, did they?
No.
Okay. So, and after conducting that review, they found that there was no evidence at all that they could find whether DTaP or Tdap cause autism. I'm just asking you a simple question, which is, since there's no evidence that whether DTaP or Tdap cause autism, isn't it a little premature to say, to make the sweeping statement that vaccines do not cause autism?
No, I do not agree with that, because absence of evidence works both ways. There's no evidence that they do, and the ideal study has not been done. I agree with that, but in the absence of any reasonable evidence that they do, I continue to recommend their use.
Okay. So you're willing to make a statement that a vaccine does not cause a condition, even in the absence of any evidence?
I'm willing to state that there is no evidence that the vaccine causes the condition, and there is a lot of evidence that they do protect against disease, and therefore the child should receive the vaccines. I mean, there are a million things on the web, including all kinds of diet advice based on ridiculous information. So why should I adopt that?
Are you saying that the IOM was engaging in a ridiculous review here?
They were doing a scientific review, which is certainly legitimate, and their conclusion that there are insufficient data to draw a formal conclusion. I can understand that and appreciate that, but that does not mean that the vaccines cause autism.
You've never been asked that. The only thing I've asked you is whether or not one can assert that vaccines do not cause autism.
Counselor,
not that they do.
Let's be real. You're asking me these questions because you want me to legitimize a view that vaccines cause autism, and I will not do that, because absence of evidence is no proof whatsoever.
I think that record is very clear, Dr. Plotkin. I'm not trying to legitimize anything. I'm just asking you to, I'm not trying to legitimize that vaccines cause autism. I think we have very clearly established what the IOM found. The IOM found, in their estimation, no evidence, right?
Right.
They found no evidence that vaccines do cause, that DTaP or Tdap cause autism. Let's make that very clear, right?
Right.
They found no evidence
Right.
that DTaP or Tdap cause autism.
Yes.
Period. They found one study which they said was unreliable because it relied on VAERS data, and it had no control, right?
Right.
Okay. But similarly, in the same vein, they also didn't find any evidence that DTaP, Tdap do not cause autism. Now, that doesn't mean that DTaP, Tdap do cause autism, correct?
Correct.
It doesn't mean that, right?
Yes.
That's right. All it means is that they couldn't find a study that showed that supported that it does not cause autism, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's why they reached the conclusion that they did, which is they said the data is insufficient, right? I assume you said, was that a yes?
Yes.
All right. Do you agree with the IOM's conclusion that the data, the evidence is insufficient to determine whether or not DTaP cause autism?
I agree with their conclusion, but that doesn't mean that I don't act on other information.
Okay. I can understand that. I can understand that. But I'm not saying that I'm not asking you to ignore any benefits you believe accrue from vaccines. Okay? I'm not asking you to do that at all, Dr. Plotkin. I'm simply asking you as a pure matter of logic, and common sense, if you don't know whether A causes something, can you say A, B, let me not use a hypothetical. If you don't know whether DTaP or TDAP cause autism, shouldn't you wait until you do know, until you have the science to support it, to then say that vaccines do not cause autism?
Do I wait? No, I do not wait, because I have to take into account the health of the child.
And so for that reason, you're okay with telling the parent that DTaP, TDAP does not cause autism, even though the science isn't there yet to support that claim?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm also willing to tell them it doesn't cause leprosy.
Okay. Again, did the IOM review whether DTaP causes leprosy?
No.
Okay. All right. Dr. Plotkin, has there ever been a study which looked at the total health outcomes of children following the CDC's vaccination schedule and those who are completely unvaccinated, such as Faith?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I don't think so. But you know, there are all kinds of studies. There's a study that suggests that children who are vaccinated compared to unvaccinated children have lower rates of leukemia. Now, do I believe that study? I find it interesting, but I would want confirmation of that study before I believed it. But just to point out that Peter Abbey, for example, as I mentioned before, found that measles vaccination had a positive effect on health and reduced mortality. I think there is abundant evidence that vaccines do contribute to the health of children. But in answer to your question, there is no study that I know of that compared the health of vaccinated children with unvaccinated children.
Why has that study not been done?
Probably because it is considered bad malpractice not to vaccinate a child.
So you're saying a prospective study might be improper because it will leave a child unvaccinated?
Correct.
Okay. What about a retrospective study?
That, I suppose, could be done, but it wouldn't be randomized.
When I say retrospective, that means using existing data, correct?
Using children.
Why don't I ask you, strike that. Can you define retrospective, please?
I mean, looking at children who had been vaccinated and comparing them to children who had not been vaccinated.
Okay. Presumably, HMOs, insurance companies would have health data on enough vaccinated and unvaccinated children to conduct such a comparison, correct?
Well, I don't know, because the percentage of unvaccinated children, fortunately, is quite low. So I'm not sure how easy it would be to do that study. And I would suspect that many of those unvaccinated children are not in registers that could be used.
You're familiar with the Vaccine Safety Data Link?
Yes.
Are you aware that there are a few thousand children that are, are you aware that there are reports from the government reports that show that there are a few thousand children that are, my understanding, completely unvaccinated in the VSD?
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Okay. Couldn't the Vaccine Safety Data Link be used to conduct a retrospective vaccinated versus unvaccinated study to look for health outcomes?
Well, I don't know. Theoretically, perhaps, but one would have to be convinced that the children were comparable in other ways besides being vaccinated or unvaccinated.
Okay. Every time you do a retrospective study, that you always need to control for potential co-founders, correct?
Correct.
And that's what you're talking about, controlling for co-founders, right?
Yes.
And you know, if you're doing a case control, properly matching cases, or if you're right, are you saying that? So I mean, the CDC, pharma, they conduct studies all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Including studies.
Yes.
Yes, including studies that have co-founders that need to be controlled for, right?
Yes. They
Vaccines.
try. Yes.
Vaccine studies, especially for efficacy, happen all the time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, again, if the data is there, why not do a study comparing vaccinated to completely unvaccinated children to look for the total health outcomes, so you know what the real risks are from vaccine, or get at least a sense of what the real risks are for from vaccinations?
Well, I can't completely answer that question. I'm sure it would be a difficult study to do, but I will repeat what I said earlier about measles vaccination. I would just remind you again that among those children who were not
You've already
vaccinated,
said all this, Dr. Plotkin. It's
yeah,
fine.
well, I'm going to repeat
I've got
it.
But
There were three deaths and 24 cases of encephalitis,
Okay.
and that's unbearable.
I'm sorry. Can you read back what Dr. Plotkin just said?
We're talking over each other.
I apologize.
Well, I can't completely answer that question. I'm sure it would be a difficult study to do, but I will repeat what I said earlier about measles vaccination. I'll just remind you again that among these children who were not dashed, you've already said all this, Dr. Plotkin. I got it. Answer, well, I'll repeat it. 3 deaths and 24 cases of encephalitis. That's unbearable.
Okay.
Excuse me. My plug is stuck under there. Give me 2 seconds again.
Take your time. Is that a problem? Okay. Yeah, it's all right. Dr. Plotkin, who prepared the notes that are in front of you?
Me,
Okay, when did you prepare those?
about a week ago, I guess.
During the break, our lunch break, did you talk with anybody?
No, well, yes, I talked with my wife.
Anybody else?
No.
Okay. So I understand that you find injuries that can result from what you've called, I believe, vaccine preventable diseases. What we're trying to do is understand the risks of vaccinating, and in particular for faith. And can you appreciate that? Understand? Strike that. So you just think it's too difficult to do a study comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated children, even though the data exists to do that. Is that right?
Well, I simply am saying that I don't know how feasible it is. I've never been asked to look at it before, but I do think a priori that it would be difficult because those children are very likely from different socioeconomic groups and different racial groups, and so it will be a difficult study to do. I don't know if it's feasible or not.
So with all of the government, so the pharmaceutical industry, you said, made approximately $20 billion last year in revenue from vaccine sales?
I think so. I don't.
I have the financial statements. Mm-hmm. Should we review them, or do you think $20 billion is about right?
I think it's about right. You know, I'm not an accountant. I don't
give or take
read those.
Give or take $1 billion or $2 billion, would you say?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
So the pharmaceutical industry has had $20 billion in revenue, and the CDC spends hundreds of millions of dollars buying vaccines every year. Is that right?
I think so.
Okay. But yet you don't think that the resources can be done to do a single solitary study comparing the health outcomes of a for-profit product given to almost every child in this country to assess what the rate of adverse reactions are between those who get all those products and those who don't?
What I said is I simply don't know whether such a study is feasible or not, but I think it would be difficult to do because it would not be a randomized study, and therefore the conclusions might be questionable. But I don't know whether such a study is feasible or not.
Aren't most studies that are done that you rely upon in that book that you have in front of you not randomized?
Many of them are not. Many of them are.
Okay. Do you throw out the ones that are not randomized?
No, it depends on what the purpose of the study is. Mm. If it's studying immune responses, it doesn't necessarily have to have a control group.
Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 23.
Whoops.
I'm sorry. Dr. Plotkin, what's an ICD-9 code?
Well, it's essentially a way of coding diseases usually for remuneration purposes.
Okay. So when a doctor administers a drug or diagnoses as a patient or something similar, there's a code that they would enter into the system, right?
Yes.
And the ICD-9 codes are published by the American Medical Association, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Please take a look at the exhibit I just handed you is the 2015 ICD-9 CM Professional Edition for Physicians Codebook, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Or at least the front page in one excerpt, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you go to the second page, do you see there's a code V64.07?
Yes.
What is that code for?
Vaccination not carried out for religious reasons.
Okay. So wouldn't it be feasible, for example, to compare children who have this coding, who are not being vaccinated, with those who are being vaccinated, who are in similar communities, have similar demographics, and otherwise avoid as much as possible other potential co-founders?
Well, if you could eliminate the co-founders, it would be feasible.
And what are the co-founders, Dr. Plotkin?
Well, as I said before, the co-founders include a socioeconomic level, racial grouping, exposure to agents. In other words, are they living in a community where it's unlikely that someone unvaccinated from Ethiopia is going to come into the community and be able to transmit diseases? There are, I mean, I'd have to sit down and write up a list of possible co-founders, but there would be many of them.
So when you do studies for efficacy, are you able to control for all of these co-founders?
Well, usually the effort is to include as many different types of individuals as possible, so that if there is a problem with a particular group, you can identify it. But doing clinical studies is not always easy, and that's why the conclusions from clinical studies have to be seen in relation to other clinical studies.
Why is it you can control for co-founders in various other vaccine studies, including in vaccine safety studies that are cited in your book, but you believe you? Are you saying you couldn't control for these same co-founders in the study of a vaccinated versus unvaccinated population?
I am unable to draw a conclusion about whether such a study is feasible. What I'm pointing out is that the likelihood of there being multiple co-founders is confounders, is very high, and therefore it wouldn't be an easy study to do. That's all I can say. I've never sat down to try to figure out how to do such a study.
Okay, well, we've got socioeconomic, which are probably pretty easy to control for, racial grouping, pretty easy to control for, exposure to agents. Since it's retrospective, you'll know if there's been an outbreak in a community. What other co-founders do you think might exist? I mean, I'd like to hear one that can you tell me a co-founder that's not easy to control for?
In principle, one can control for any confounding problem. The issue would be just how many there are and just how large a group you would need for statistical significance. See, that's another issue. I mean, we accept as a valid conclusion something that is false 5 times out of 100. And so not only do we have to try to eliminate confounders, but we also need repetition of studies to be sure that the results we got in the first study were not in the 5 studies that were false in their conclusion.
But
so you would need multiple studies.
Okay. And since these are retrospective, they're really just running data, right?
If the data are encoded, yes.
Okay. So I asked earlier, what co-founder can you list that's not easy to control for? And I did not hear another co-founder. Can you tell me a co-founder in this proposed study that would not be easy to control for?
Exposure would be probably the most difficult. In other words, whether a child is living in a community where exposure to disease is rare or absent, or a child is living in a community where there are significant possibilities of exposure. I think that would be probably the most difficult to account for.
When's the last case of polio in the United States, wild polio?
Oh, I forget the exact year, but it's been probably 20, 25 years.
Would 1979 sound correct to you?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. So that wouldn't be an issue, correct?
No,
Exposure?
polio would not be an issue.
Okay. How many cases of diphtheria have there been in the last 10 years in the United States?
it's very rare or absent.
All right. Less than 5, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't that true for most of the diseases, except for maybe pertussis, right?
Well, pertussis, HIV, hepatitis, those are diseases that are still common.
Okay, so if we excluded...
Mumps, yeah.
Go ahead. Mumps, pertussis. Okay. So since this is retrospective, we would know where those outbreaks are, right? Because they're very carefully tracked by the CDC, correct? Since we know where the outbreaks are for those diseases, that could be, was that a yes?
Yes.
Since we know where those outbreaks are, that could be actually probably pretty easily controlled for as well, correct?
In principle, yes.
Okay, so can you name me a co-founder that would be difficult to control for in the study?
Well, at the moment, I can't think of any other that would be material, although I think one would have to look at genetic issues and the health of other members in the family and so forth. But again, I am not saying that such a study is impossible. I'm just pointing out that it would be a very difficult study to do, and the conclusions that you could draw from the study might be very limited.
Well, when you keep saying it's difficult, but and your reason for that, I understand, is potential co-founders, and I'm just trying to understand what those are. So you've said familial history. Presumably the parents would be in the same health plan as the children, so you'd have the parents' medical history too, correct? So that could be controlled for as well, right?
Yes.
And you said 2 questions ago?
Yes.
That was a yes? Okay. So that could be easily controlled for, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so can you tell me again, can you tell me a co-founder that would actually be difficult to control for in this study?
Well, other than the ones that I've mentioned, and not having thought about doing such a study, that's all I can say.
Okay. If you did such a study, are you aware that advocacy groups and other people interested in this issue have been calling for this exact study of comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated for 30 years already?
I don't spend a lot of time on the web, so I can't say that I know that such a study is being requested.
Okay. Well, but you do read IOM reports and CDC
Yes.
reports. Okay. And you never come across any IOM or CDC reports in which they specifically address the repeated calls for such a study?
No.
Okay. Would it be surprising to you if I told you those existed?
That what existed?
That CDC and IOM reports in which they document the calls for such a study?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, no.
Would you be surprised to know that the CDC, in fact, issued an entire report regarding conducting such a study and the calls for conducting such a study?
And they issued a what, did you say?
I said, would you be surprised to know that the CDC, in fact, issued a report in response to the requests for the calls for such a study?
No, I wouldn't be surprised that there was a response, no.
Okay. So, in looking for such a study, isn't it true that there actually has been one such study conducted in the past, for the first time ever in the last year, correct?
I'm not aware of that study.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 24. The title of this study is A Pilot Comparative Study of the Health of Vaccinated and Unvaccinated 6 to 12-year-old United States children, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the authors of this study are professors at the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, School of Public Health, Jackson State University, correct?
Just a minute.
That's what it says.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, let's just wait for co-counsel to get a copy.
Sorry about that.
I thought it had gone through. Did you mark these? Okay, so
Ms. Newsma, do you have it?
I shouldn't just, yep.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
are you familiar with this pilot study, Dr. Plotkin?
No.
Okay.
I see it's been published in the Journal of Translational Science, which is not one of the journals I read, and is probably one of those multiple so-called predatory journals that we are trying to deal with currently.
So is anybody in any university that publishes anything that's negative about vaccines predatory, or I forgot the other
No,
adjectives you used
it's
earlier
not.
today?
It's not that. Is that there are journals now that will publish anything for money,
Ah,
and I get about 10 of those invitations a day.
so does money influence judgment,
It may.
conduct? Yeah.
It may. I
Okay.
cannot tell
So-
until I read this study.
I understand. So, well, in this study, if you look, if you take a quick look at it, you'll see that it involves looking at total health outcomes between vaccinated and unvaccinated homeschool children.
Yes.
Okay. When you're ready, please turn to page 5. Now, do you see the row that says chickenpox?
Yes.
Okay, so the odds ratio for the unvaccinated were twice as likely. No, I'm sorry, 4 times as likely to get chickenpox, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 0.26, so odds ratio about 4. The kids who were unvaccinated were about 4 times more likely to get chickenpox.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that a yes?
Yes.
And do you see for whooping cough, the unvaccinated children were 3 times as likely to get whooping cough?
Yes.
Yes. Go down to where it says allergic rhinitis. What is
Yes.
that?
Well, it's essentially runny nose because of allergy.
Okay. Do you see that it says that the vaccinated children were 30 times as likely to have allergic rhinitis?
Yes, I see that number.
Do you see that it says that vaccinated children were 3.9 times as likely to have allergies?
Yes.
4.2 times as likely to have ADHD?
Yes.
4.2 times as likely to have autism spectrum disorder?
Yes.
2.9 times as likely to have eczema?
Mm-hmm.
5.2 times as 5.2 times as likely to have learning disability?
Yes.
3.7 times as likely to have neurodevelopment disorder?
Yes.
And 2.4 times as likely to have any chronic condition?
Yes.
Okay. Wouldn't you like to see a larger scale study that refuted these claims?
It would be ideal, yes. It would certainly be important to repeat the study and to enroll patients in a blinded fashion. I really would have to read this to see exactly how they enrolled the children or the parents in this study.
Doesn't the existence of the study, though, strike that? Okay, so it at least calls for further similar studies, hopefully, to either confirm or disprove the findings in the study, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I would agree.
Okay. And I'm going to show you one more study that was done with the same data from this author. Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 25. Has it been sent? Okay. This is another study by this is another publication using the same data, I believe, from the same group of professors at the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, School of Public Health, Jackson State University, correct?
It appears that way, yes.
Yeah. Okay, and the title of this one is Preterm Birth, Vaccination, and Neurodevelopmental Disorders, a cross-sectional study of 6 to 12-year-old vaccinated and unvaccinated children, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you a moment to read the abstract. Have you ever seen this study before?
No.
Okay, so just take a moment, please, and read the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So in the middle of the abstract, I'm going to read two sentences, and you can tell me if I've read them correctly. No association was found between preterm birth and NDD in the absence of vaccination. Strike that. Actually, Dr. Plotkin, could you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down in the abstract? You see where it starts, no association?
Yes.
Can you read that sentence and the next one?
No association was found between preterm birth and NDD in the absence of vaccination, but vaccination was significantly associated with NDD in children born at term, odds ratio 2.7. Is that sufficient?
And the next sentence, please, sir. Thank you.
However, vaccination coupled with preterm birth was associated with increasing odds of NDD, ranging from 5.4 compared to vaccinated but non-preterm children to 14.5 compared to children who were neither preterm nor vaccinated.
Okay. What does NDD stand for?
Neurodevelopmental disorders.
Right. And in this study, it was defined as learning disability, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and autism spectrum disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But I will also point out
Yes.
that the abstract says that it was a convenience sample of 666 children. So clearly it was in no way a randomized study.
Shouldn't we do better studies,
One would have to do a better study if
larger samples?
larger samples and enrollment, not by convenience.
Right. I believe Dr. Mawson calls these pilot studies, correct? Because nobody else is doing them, so he tried with limited resources, not the resources of pharmaceutical companies and the CDC, to conduct such a study, right?
Well, that's your interpretation. I would have to read the study.
Fair enough. More than fair. Is it possible that his findings in both of these studies could be correct?
Is it possible? Yes, of course. Possibility is always possible.
And hopefully, and ideally, you would conduct a larger or at least additional similar studies to either confirm or dispute the findings in these studies, correct?
Ideally, yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. In terms of randomization, if, to make sure I understand the concept, if I, for example, choose to vaccinate based solely on birth dates, would that be randomized?
Yes.
Okay. And that would be considered a randomized study?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked, what is being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 24. 26. Thank you. Sorry. This is the Peter Abe study that you and I were talking about earlier, correct?
This is one of them.
Right. This is the study in which Peter Abe found that children who received DPT in the first 6 months of life versus those who got no vaccines died at 10 times the rate, correct?
Right.
And in this study, you earlier said that your concerns with Abe's prior studies that had similar conclusions was that they weren't randomized. But in this study, it was randomized, correct? Because it was, let me, strike that. In this study, the vaccinated versus unvaccinated children were simply vaccinated or unvaccinated purely by the chance of when their birthday happened to be. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it says they were allocated by birthday. Have to, let's see. Well, it's not absolutely clear as to how the randomization was done. Apparently, there were periods of time when they were vaccinating and other periods when they were not vaccinating.
I think that if you have you read the
but
study before, Dr. Plotkin?
I've glanced at it. Yes, I haven't read it thoroughly, but as I said before, this kind of study is useful. There's no doubt about that. But one needs to have some sort of immunological correlate to really confirm that the findings are real. The other point is that Peter is working in an African community where there was a high mortality to begin with, and that's of course because of other factors. And so whether this would be true in, let's say, Denmark or elsewhere is not clear. And if my memory serves, attempts to show in Denmark what Peter has found in Africa have not been positive.
Are you saying that there's a randomized study in Denmark comparing death rates between DPT and T?
It was.
1 second.
It was not.
Dr. Plotkin,
Yeah.
hold on a second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you gotta let me, because the court reporter can't take down both of us talking, okay? I'm asking is there a study from Denmark that compared children who received DTP versus children who received no vaccines at all, that was randomized, like this study was, and that compared the death rate between the two groups?
Well, I'd have to go back and look, but my recollection is that because in Denmark everything is registered and they had excellent data on vaccines being given, that they did not find an effect on mortality of giving DTP. But regardless, my point is that mortality in the developed world is relatively rare in childhood, whereas in Africa it's obviously common. But let me repeat what I said about Peter Abe's work. It's not that I discard it or think that his conclusions are wrong. What I'm saying is that they are observational data and they have to be confirmed by studies of the immune responses, and those have been done only to a certain degree.
When you say studies of immune response, what do you mean?
I mean whether the immunity of the child is interfered with by DTP, that is immunity to other diseases. And as I mentioned before, he has shown that measles vaccine has a positive effect, and that has been confirmed by showing that measles vaccination influences immunity to other diseases.
So what you're saying is that you don't dispute his findings that at least in this African country,
yes,
there is a 10 times greater death rate amongst those who got DPT in the first 6 months of life versus those who got no vaccines, correct?
I don't dispute his findings. I would have to look further to make sure that the populations that were studied were absolutely equal in other respects.
Okay.
But again, I'm not one who discards Peter's studies a priori.
Well, because earlier you told me the issue was it wasn't randomized, but now
That is an important issue, yes.
and it is this one is randomized.
Well, again, I just have to be sure that it was randomized, that both groups were vaccinated or non-vaccinated at the same time rather than sequentially.
Yes, because it was done by birthdays. When people came into the clinics, right, depending on their birth date, they either got the vaccine or they didn't, correct? I need the 1994. Oh, you know what? I don't need it. I have it. I'm sorry. Correct?
Well, subject to my reading this carefully, I agree that he is claiming that it's randomized.
So DTaP has been used around the world for what, 30, 40 years now? 50 years?
Mainly since the 1990s,
Okay.
so
Mainly
about
1990s.
20 years.
And Peter Abe has been making this claim, a respected scientist whose conclusions you said you take seriously, that DTP might cause more deaths than people it saves.
Yeah,
But let me just finish my question, please. When do you think this extra science on immunology you think is necessary is going to get done? So we know whether or not DTP is saving more children than it kills.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that WHO is looking into it. I don't know that for a fact. But it also has to be pointed out that the vaccine that he's studying is whole cell vaccine. It is not the vaccine being used in the United States.
That's right, but it is being used in most third world countries, correct?
In the vaccines being used in the United States are being used in the U.S. and Europe.
The
But
DTP
the
vaccine.
DTP, the whole cell vaccine, is used very largely in Latin America and Africa.
In
and
developing
Asia.
countries.
Yes.
Any reason that the life of a child in a developing country is not equal to that in a first world country?
No,
Okay.
but the whole cell vaccine is considerably cheaper.
Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 24. 27? What is that? What does it say on there?
27.
27. Sorry. Looked like a 4 to me. Got that? Okay. This is an excerpt from the 1994 IOM report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Under risk modifying factors, okay, the first sentence there says the committee was able to identify little information pertaining to why some individuals react adversely to vaccines when most do not.
Yes.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And handing you what's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 28. I'm going to read you an excerpt from this, and I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. It says, both epidemiologic and mechanistic research suggests that most individuals who experience an adverse reaction to vaccines have a pre-existing susceptibility. These predispositions can exist for a number of reasons. Genetic variations in human or microbiome DNA, environmental exposures, behaviors, intervening illness, or developmental stage, to name just a few, all of which can interact as suggested graphically in figure 3-1. Some of these adverse reactions are specific to the particular vaccine, while others may not be. Some of these predispositions may be detectable prior to the administration of vaccines. And then skipping down a little, much work remains to be done to elucidate and develop strategies to document the immunologic mechanisms that lead to adverse effects in individual patients. Do you disagree with what the IOM wrote here?
Well, not in principle. If such factors can be identified, so far it has been very difficult to identify so-called predispositions.
Isn't that because, Dr. Plotkin, the science is just not being done to make those identify?
Well, some attempts have been made. There's a whole literature by Dr. Poland at the Mayo Clinic on such, but the things that he's studied have been relatively minor reactions.
Are you aware of any serious large-scale studies that have been done to assess the predispositions that might result in an adverse reaction from a vaccine?
There have been some genetic studies done.
By who?
As I said, by the Mayo Group in particular, and also some studies done at Vanderbilt.
Okay, who did the studies at Vanderbilt?
Well, James Crow was one of the authors.
Okay, and what did the studies involve?
The studies involved looking at certain enzymes, particularly, to see if there was an association with, let's see, it was with, I'm trying to remember which vaccine it was based on. Smallpox vaccine.
Smallpox. Do people routinely get smallpox vaccine anymore in America?
No.
Okay. Other than the researcher at Vanderbilt and the one at the Mayo Clinic that you mentioned, is there anybody else that you know of that is conducting any serious science to identify what would render a child susceptible to a vaccine injury?
No, I think the people of British Columbia are doing some work.
Who's that?
Can't remember the guy's name.
Is it Chris Shaw?
Sorry?
Is his name Chris Shaw?
Could be. It's a whole group of people at British Columbia.
And they've published good science in this area?
Yes.
Respectable science.
Yes.
And they are the ones who've looked at aluminum adjuvants injected into lab animals in particular, correct?
They have done some work with aluminum adjuvants, yes.
Showing that injecting aluminum can go to different parts of the animal, right?
Yes.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same group of scientists. At the University of British Columbia. So so do you recall if it's Chris Shaw and his group?
I don't recall specifically.
Okay, but it's the group at the University of British Columbia that's looking in particular at aluminum adjuvants in vaccines, correct?
Well,
in animal models.
They're looking at a lot of different things, including adjuvants.
Okay. Understood. Okay. And other than the group at British Columbia, Mayo Clinic, and Vanderbilt, are you aware of anybody else doing such science?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. If anybody would know, it would be you, right, Dr. Plotkin?
Well, I cannot read every published scientific paper.
Fair enough. Okay. Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to refer to the various forms of aluminum adjuvant,
I'm sorry.
to various forms of aluminum adjuvant used in vaccines as alum. Is that okay?
Yes,
Because there are different kinds, correct?
yes.
Okay. What is an antigen?
An antigen is usually a protein that induces an immune response.
Antigens in killed vaccines, though, produce a very weak immune response, hence the need to add alum to the vaccine formulation, correct?
Frequently, not always.
Okay. And alum, injected alum can increase the production of all kinds of cytokines, including IL-1, IL-2, IL-6, IL-17, correct?
Yes,
Okay. Alum can be recovered from the injection site months or years after intramuscular injections, correct?
well, it's possible to find alum. Of course, aluminum is a frequent, what shall I say, is present in all of us. We ingest a lot of it.
I'm actually talking about injected aluminum. I'm asking, can it be recovered from the injection site months or years after intramuscular injection?
I believe it's possible, yes.
Okay. Okay. If I want to read in your book that you're holding in front of you, do you know if it says, quote, "It is established that aluminum salt can be recovered at the injection site months or years after intramuscular injections"?
Well, I'd have to look at it, but I don't doubt that that could be in the book, yes.
Okay. An antigen that is absorbed by alum can be taken up by macrophages and dendritic cells.
I'm
Yes,
sorry. I didn't say.
No problem. Antigen that is absorbed by alum are taken up by macrophages and dendritic cells. Correct. Macrophages is MACROPHAGES. Macrophages are immune cells, correct?
well, they are scavengers, basically.
And what do?
They take up antigens and present them to other cells.
So that means that the alum, as well as the antigen that's bound to it, are taken up by macrophages and dendritic cells, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Aluminum injected into the brain, into the body, can travel to the brain, correct?
I don't know that for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised.
You've never seen any studies that show that aluminum injected into the body can travel to the brain?
I have not seen such studies, no. Or not read such studies.
I'm going to hand you what's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 29. Please take a look at that. Did you send it? In this study, do you have a problem with the journal that this study was published in?
No.
Is the name of the journal Vaccine?
Yes.
Are you a editor in that journal?
I was at one point.
And you consider that be a prestigious journal?
Yes.
Okay. So in this study, they found that injecting rabbits with aluminum, and then they dissected them, they found aluminum in the brain of the rabbits, correct?
Yes.
Does that change your opinion of whether injecting aluminum can travel to the brain?
Well, it shows experimentally that that's the case. I'd have to look at the concentrations that were injected,
Okay.
whether they were reasonable with respect to what's injected into humans.
Here's another study. Here's another study that's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 30. And this study involved mice. Can you please take a look at it? And that study's from 2009, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
Ms. Newsma, did number 30 go through for you?
Yes.
okay.
I'll let you know if I have anything.
And that study found that injecting aluminum in mice caused motor deficits and motor neuron degeneration, correct?
Apparently, yes. But again, one has to compare the amounts injected with what amounts are injected with vaccines.
So in this study, the authors note that they were attempting to use dose equivalent amounts of alum vis-a-vis the vaccination schedule. I'll pose that as a question, but I'll leave it to you to take, you obviously, it sounds like you've never read the study, so you could take your time. Okay. And Dr. Plotkin. Stop marking these. Start sending them to her. Okay, Dr. Plotkin, there's no question pending about that study anymore. So let's move on.
Okay.
Okay. Are you familiar with a study entitled Delivery of Nanoparticles to Brain Metastases of Breast Cancer Using a Cellular Trojan Horse from the Indiana University School of Medicine and Rice University?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with a study from 2013 entitled Slow CCL2 Dependent Translocation of Biopersistent Particles from Muscle to Brain?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with the and after this deposition, I'm happy to provide you copies of all these studies. You can take an opportunity to look at them. Are you familiar with a 2015 study entitled Highly actually, you know what, before we continue, I'm going to mark this one. The study I just spoke about, I'm going to mark as Plaintiff's Exhibit 32. I'm going to hand this to you. Yeah, I'll give that to you in a second. In this study, if you turn to page 5, you can actually see pictures of the brain of dissected mice injected with aluminum and pictures of the aluminum in the brain. Let me know when you've had an opportunity to look at that.
Yes, okay.
Okay. That's from 2013. I'm going to show you another study from 2015. I'm being marked a Plaintiff's Exhibit number 33. Okay. This study involved 155 mice, again injected with aluminum, and again you can find pictures of the aluminum in the dissected mice in their brains. Since we're running short on time, I won't hand you all the studies on this. But having had an opportunity just for the last few minutes to look at a few of these studies, do you have any? Can aluminum injected into the body travel to the brain?
Well, there are experiments suggesting that is possible.
Okay.
In particular, I know there's a French group that's been, let's say, working on the potential dangers of aluminum, as well as the British Columbia group. What we lack is evidence in humans that such phenomena are causing the problems that are being caused in mice, and that may relate to dose issues.
Yeah. Isn't that because those studies would be unethical, Dr. Plotkin?
No, I wouldn't say they'd be unethical. I would say that looking for aluminum deposits in the brains of people at autopsy, etc., that's entirely feasible.
And so if they did autopsies of people's brains and they found aluminum, then that would be a cause for concern?
It could be, but one would need to combine that or look at the symptoms of the patients whose brains are being examined.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to hand you one final study on this. It's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 34. This one, they were very careful, my understanding, is to give to do a number of different dose responses and different doses to see the response.
Oh, yeah, this is the French group.
That study is the French group, right? That I think you were referring to earlier?
Yes.
Okay. So, in any event, if aluminum bound to antigen does travel to the brain, Dr. Plotkin, and remains there, would that cause an immune activation event in the brain?
I don't know whether it would or not.
Okay. Do you think it could result in neurodevelopmental disorders?
Again, there's no evidence that that's the case.
I'm going to hand you what's being marked. Yeah. Okay. being handed you what's marked Exhibit 35. Are you familiar with, let me know. Go ahead. Oh, shoot. That's 104. Familiar with this book?
No.
Okay, well then, I'll give you a copy today when you leave. Okay.
Ms. Newsman, Exhibit 35 is uploading, but it might take just 1 second.
Dr. Plotkin, has an increase in IL-6 been shown to induce autism-like features in lab animals?
Well, IL-6 is an inflammatory cytokine, and its relationship to autism, I would say, is not clear, but it is an important cytokine.
Has it been shown to induce autism-like features in animals when injected into animals for experimentation?
I'm not aware of that, but it's quite possible that that could happen if you use enough IL-6.
Do you know the maximum amount? Strike that. No, I don't have time to do the marking. Are you familiar with the study out of? You familiar with the study entitled "Inhibition of IL-6 trans signaling in the brain increases social ability in the BTBR mouse model of autism"?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with the study called "Maternal Immune Activation Alters Fetal Brain Development Through Interleukin 6"?
Vaguely, yes. Yeah.
Published in the Journal of Neuroscience?
Yeah, well, I don't remember the journal.
Is that one of the journals you consider respectable?
Yes.
Okay. And this was out of the University of California Medical Center. This is from California Institute of Caltech. That institution did a number of studies regarding immune activation and its effects, right? Respected group.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Sorry, that group did a number of studies related to immune activation and neurological disorder, correct?
Yes.
And they found a connection between immune activation and neurological disorders, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And one of the, is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the studies findings they had was that immune activation alters fetal brain development through interleukin 6, correct?
As I said before, IL-6 is an important cytokine. I would point out in relation to immune activation that immune activation occurs as a result of disease and exposure to a variety of stimuli, not just vaccines.
But it can be caused by vaccines, correct?
Immune activation is the objective of vaccines.
Do you know the maximum amount of aluminum that is injected into a child who follows the CDC schedule?
I haven't done the arithmetic, but I believe it would amount to several milligrams.
Mark these. Mark these two. I'll mark this one. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 36. Okay? And before I do that, question for you. The group out of the British Columbia that you were. The group out of the University of British Columbia, that's out of the Department of Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences.
Yeah.
All right. And, okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to hand you a letter from what's been marked as Exhibit 36, which is a letter from one of the professors that runs the lab in that group.
We have 4 minutes left on the disc.
Okay. Have you seen this letter before?
No.
Okay. This letter is from the group at the University of British Columbia you mentioned before, correct?
Yes.
And it's addressed to HHS, correct?
Yes.
As well as NIH,
Yes.
FDA, and CDC, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In the first paragraph, can you read the first paragraph?
I am writing to you in regard to aluminum adjuvants in vaccines. The subject of one is one my laboratory works on intensively, and therefore where I feel I have some expertise. In particular, we have studied the impact of aluminum adjuvants in animal models of neurological disease, including autism spectrum disorder. Our relevant studies on the general topic of aluminum neurotoxicity in general, and specifically in regard to adjuvants, are cited below.
Now, can you read the last sentence in the next paragraph?
In children, there is growing evidence that aluminum adjuvants may disrupt developmental processes in the central nervous system and therefore contribute to ASD in susceptible children.
And just the next paragraph.
Despite the foregoing, the safety of aluminum adjuvants in vaccines has not been properly studied in humans, even though pursuant to the recommended vaccine schedule published by the Centers for Disease Control, a baby may be injected with up to 3.675 micrograms of aluminum adjuvant by 6 months of age.
And just the next sentence, I guess we can wrap up.
In regard to the above, it is my belief that the CDC's claim on its website that vaccines do not cause autism is wholly unsupported. So my comments are, one, that my estimate was pretty much correct. Second, that unfortunately Dr. Shaw has been associated with the party that I mentioned before, Tomlyanovich, who in my view is completely untrustworthy as far as scientific data are concerned. So I'm concerned about Dr. Shaw being influenced by that individual. And I'm not aware that there is evidence that aluminum disrupts developmental processes in susceptible children.
Dr. Shaw is a scientist that studies aluminum regularly, correct?
Yes.
Do you study aluminum regularly?
No.
Okay. We done?
Yeah. Okay. This ends tape 4 of the deposition of Dr. Stэнli Plotkin. We are going off the record. The time is 16:03.